And welcome everyone to another. This one's an exciting episode of Isles Talk. My name is Paul Kreischer. I'm your only host this evening, and as of right now, I have two guests coming in. I did a pre-recorded um, interview with Mike McMahon from the College Hockey News to talk about Alex Jefferies and Cameron Berg, two players I've been watching since the Islanders have been drafted. Uh, at this point. Um, I think you really are going to like what Mike and I have to chat about. And in the second half of the show, as of right now, I do have Patrick Williams coming on at 7:30, but he is covering the Calder Cup playoffs down in Hershey. So again, things may happen. If he doesn't show up, we're still going to talk about Bridgeport at around 7:30, and we'll have him on the show at another time. So for right now, please enjoy the first session here with me and Mike McMahon as we talk about Alex Jefferies, Cameron Berg, and a few others. And welcome everyone to another exciting episode here on Isles Talk. My name is Paul Kreischer. I'm your host for this first half-hour segment of Isles Path to the Draft 2023. My guest today is all things college hockey. He is Mike McMahon from the College Hockey News and the College Hockey Insider newsletter. Mike, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I have been watching all of your shows on the Hockey Prospect Radio. I listen to you guys on the weekends whenever you're there. This for me, this is still a treat to actually get you on the show.
Absolutely. No, thanks for having me. Yeah, Shane and I have known each other a long time, so it's been fun doing those with him as well.
And I have Shane next weekend, so I'm all giddy about that next week too. So listen, this part of the show, the season, and everything, I try to do this for the younger Islander fans who are learning about hockey. They're learning about the drafting. They're learning about the development of players, and kind of like what the Islanders were doing in the dynasty years, and the middle part of the '90s there. As far as college goes, what are some of the advantages for players to play in college as opposed to maybe the junior ranks in Canada?
So it's an interesting question, and I think it's different based on the player need. And I tell this story a lot, but I always go back to it. Probably it was a while ago now because Mike Matheson has been in the league for so long. But when Mike Matheson was at Boston College, I did a story on him for, I think it was for the Hockey News, and it basically had to do with why he chose to go to Boston College over Quebec, because that was what he was trying to figure out what he was going to do. He was either going to go to the Quebec Remparts, I think is what who drafted him, or he was going to look at going to Boston College, and he was trying to figure out the right route, which was the right way for him. And for him, as a like 6'5" defenseman, he knew, hey, I've got to be as physically strong as I can be. So he looked at the two avenues. He told me the story. He goes, he sat at the kitchen table with his dad and looked at the Rempart schedule from the previous season and the BC schedule from the previous season and said, okay, how many days a week can I lift? How many days a week can I get in the weight room? And, Xing out the day before and the day after a game and things like that. He made the choice to play college hockey in large part because he knew he was going to have the time to develop to getting just physically stronger. So I think that is a key component for the players that need that. Not every player needs that. Some players need the game action and need to play 70 or 80 games a year, and major junior is a better route, obviously, for that. I think from what I've talked to players that have come through the college model, which is predominantly what I do, the strength and conditioning component is a big one. And then just the overall development opportunities. There's a lot more practice, right? They're practicing 5 days a week. They're generally playing twice. There's very rarely are you getting midweek games. So I think players have told me they feel like they have a better chance to develop more long term because they're practicing so much more. And there's the strength component that goes along with that, the video components that go along with that. And then at the same time, too, there's a big difference between playing major junior from your 17-year-old year to your 20-year-old year and then having to go pro and potentially going to college till you're 22 or 23. There's some kids who just physically mature a little bit later on. And you see it all the time. There's kids that will tell stories and go, geez, I grew 6 inches when I was 17 years old or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So it kind of gives them that opportunity to grow into themselves a little bit. And there's kids that play multiple sports until they're out of high school at 18 years old. So maybe at 18 or 19 is when they really become a full-time hockey player. So major junior is not really a thing for them, but maybe college is if they're on that path. So there's a multitude of reasons for it. But I think the biggest thing from the players that I've talked to who've gone that route, the biggest advantages that they say are the development opportunities. And I think it starts with that strength and conditioning component.
Do you feel college players, when they're done with their college career, um, have you seen enough of the players that it's an easier transition to say the American Hockey League than it would be for some junior players?
I think it is. Yeah. I mean, especially if you're talking about the junior or senior player who's coming out of school at 21, 22, maybe even 23 years old. If you're an older senior, you might be 24. Those guys, I think, are better. It's an easier it's a transition, but it's an easier transition because of the fact that they've played against older, stronger players who are older college players. Even the younger guys that come out of school at 20, they're not playing. A kid that's 20 years old in major junior is playing against other 20-year-olds and 19-year-olds. A kid who's 20-year-old in college might be playing against a 24 or 25-year-old senior, especially some of the schools that tend to recruit, a lot older. So I think that does get them more ready for the physicality of that type of game. I don't know if it matters that much in terms of the speed, but I definitely think from a strength standpoint, we do see those guys make a quicker adjustment.
Moving along in their development here, let's say the college player gets drafted by, let's just say the Islanders drafted someone and they're in their first year of college and the numbers are horrible. It's like he's not living up to that first round, second round expectation. My first question, because I have played college sports, is there still seniority when you're in college? You got to play the seniors, the upperclassmen first, to give these freshmen and sophomores a little more time to get used to the physicality? Or are coaches these days really going to play the best player out there?
I think the coaches are going to play the best player out there. Or let me put it like
Thank
this.
God.
They're going to play the player that they feel gives them the best chance to win, because
Good.
ultimately they're getting fired if they don't.
Right.
Now, I do think sometimes you'll see a younger player get to school at 18 years old and not be ready for that grind, that physical grind that the season's going to be, and they may not get the playing time that they're going to get as a junior or senior. I've seen that happen a million times. Typically speaking, I think you really look at players, even the non-drafted players. I look at where are they at the end of their sophomore year. I think if you've seen a progression from the beginning of the freshman season to the second half of their sophomore year, if there's been a pretty significant jump, and I know we're going to talk about a couple of players in a little bit who made jumps like that, that's how you can kind of see and go, okay, this is the player that they're going to be. Because absolutely, especially the 18-year-olds that come in early, and it depends on the school. Like there's some schools that if they don't bring a kid in at 18 years old, they may not get him. So they recruited him at 16. They have the kid under agreement at 18. If they let him go play another year in the USHL, which he could probably benefit from, there's a pretty good chance that someone else is going to scoop them up. So some of those schools have to bring in kids early and deal with the growing pains, knowing that they're going to be there, and it may result in a kid being in and out of the lineup at the very beginning.
Okay.
Ultimately, though, I think coaches are playing the kids that they think give them the best chance to win the game.
And just expanding on that, in recent history, COVID has completely messed up the development of a lot of these players, especially those freshmen or sophomores. When COVID hit, they lost almost a full year of development, depending on where they were. Is that a big reason why we saw a lot of fifth-year seniors over the last 2 years or so, and a lot of overagers getting drafted in the draft because we just didn't know who they were, during those times?
I think that is a big part of it. The NCAA also passed a rule that guys get that extra year, that fifth year,
Yeah.
if you were affected by COVID in either the what was it? I think it was either the 1920 season or the 2021 season. If you were a player in either of those years, you get a fifth year. That's thrown a really big wrinkle into the mix because
Yes.
there's guys. I talked to a player last week who's coming back for his fifth year at a school. And he said to me, he's like, look, I had options to go pro. Like, I'm done with my bachelor's degree. I could stay and get a grad degree and play a fifth year, or I could go play in the ECHL as a non-drafted player. He's like, what sounds more fun to you? He's like, I want to get a grad degree and play another year of college hockey.
Right.
So those guys have stuck around more, which has limited some of the opportunities, especially for the 2001s, 2002s,
Yes.
who are trying to get in as freshmen. There wasn't as many opportunities there because there were so many fifth-year players that were able to stay in the pool for an extra year. Only 2 more years of that.
Right.
That will go away in 2 more years because those players will just age out and
Yes.
graduate. But it's still something that's been kicking around.
Good. All right. So for Islander fans right now who are brand new to the show, welcome so much. Thank you for coming on. We got Mike McMahon here. We're talking college prospects from the Islanders specifically. And I'm going to touch on the first player here, Cameron Berg, newly transferred to the University of North Dakota. Listen, Mike, when the Islanders traded Atu Ratu, their first round pick, and Anthony Beauvillier for Bo Horvat, everyone's like, great, we don't have another centerman in the prospect pool or whatnot. And I've been saying since I blew in the face again, we have Cameron Berg. I have been on Cameron Berg now since the Islanders drafted him. He reminds me, and I'm not saying potential, but in a form, almost like a J.G. Pageau, Michael Pekka. He's a defensive centerman, but he's got a shot. And he has, from what limited amount I've seen, he's got a decent 200-foot game so far. Give me your thoughts and impressions on Cameron Berg. And tell me if I'm wrong on the hype.
No, I think you've hit it right on the head. And I don't know what that role is going to be for him at the pro level, but I'll say this. 23 points as a freshman. We just talked about guys that sometimes have to grow into their role a little bit.
Yes.
He had 23 points as a freshman at Omaha in the NCHC, which is a league that tends to play. I mean, those are hard schools to play against. A lot of those schools play a pro style game. North Dakota, he's playing against North Dakota, Denver, Western Michigan. Like, those are older. They tend to trend a little bit older. They're heavy teams. Not easy to come in and play as a young freshman. Not only did he play, he performed pretty well. 24 points again as a sophomore. Again, two-way centerman. It says something when a team like North Dakota, traditionally one of the best teams in the country, sees that guy a lot, play against him 4 times a year for the last 2 years, and when he goes in the transfer portal, he becomes one of their top targets pretty early on. I think that says a lot about him as a player. Where he projects as a pro, look, I think someone who plays his style of game, there's a role for him somewhere. There's a lot of guys, the guys that I think don't do well or that take some time and struggle a little bit more to find their place as a pro are the guys who have only ever been a top 6 player. They can only be a top 6 player. So it's like, if there's not a role for him in the top 2 lines in the power play, what do you do with them? Okay. Cameron Berg's a guy that you can say, you know what, while he's learning, he can play on our 4th line. And then as he grows into his role, he can play on our 3rd line. The 3rd line might be the ceiling, but if he continues to progress, maybe he becomes a 2nd line center. I think Pekka is a really good comparison because I think his game is very similar.
Good. Yeah. Obviously, he's going to be much faster than Michael Pekka. I agree. He's got 47 points in 74 games. And how is he? It's like you said before. He's in that same division. He's in that same conference, and he's from North Dakota. But now he's going to North Dakota. How is that development going to benefit him?
Well, I think his role is going to expand. He was in a top role at Omaha. He's one of their top players, one of their top centers. I think he's going to be in a very similar role at North Dakota. He's going to be surrounded by more, draft pick type players, for lack of a better term. And North Dakota is kind of rebuilding on the fly a little bit as well. They didn't have the type of season that they wanted to have last year. They know they have to reload a little bit. And I think at North Dakota, he's going to be in a similar role, top 6 center, but a top 6 center, top 2 line center who can play anywhere. he's going to play in every situation, which is really what is key. He's going to play on the power play. He's going to play on the penalty kill. He's going to be one of their top minute guys at the center position at even strength too. He checks off a lot of boxes. He's one of those just kind of prototypical college players who can be 100-point scorer if he stays for 4 years, and it's hard to find those guys. It's not because, like we said earlier, guys tend to start slower and then kind of pop at the end of their sophomore year and really take off as a junior and senior. He kind of took off as a freshman. It's hard to ignore like 23 points as a freshman, especially in that league.
All right, so moving on now, a little more of your bread and butter here. We're moving over to Merrimack and the other Islander prospect that the Islanders have. Great number, by the way. Alex Jefferies, number 19 for Merrimack. You follow Merrimack quite a bit, if I'm not mistaken. For me, Alex Jefferies, I think he's the closest thing drafted probably since like a Thomas Vanek mold. He loves that perimeter. He can move in to those sneaky plays if he wants to. He makes those really good passes, and the kid can score. So again, I'm not saying Thomas Vanek potential, but he's got a better two-way game than Vanek ever did, and he's learning in a conference that's they're top 20 in the school, top 20 in the nation. So give me your thoughts on Alex Jefferies.
That two-way game grew a lot this past year.
Thank you.
That was an area that I don't want to say it was a struggle, but that was something that I know he was really focused on developing as a freshman and a sophomore. I thought it really took off this year, and it may have even limited some of his scoring potential, to be honest with you. Like, he had 41 points, led the team in scoring, was a finalist for Hockey's Player of the Year, and I think he could have had more points if he was a little more selfish. But it's good to see him play. It's good to see him play the way that he did play, because I know it was a focus for him and it was a focus for the coaching staff there to really develop that part of his game, because without it, you're not going to play in the NHL. Unless you're as skilled as Connor Bedard, if you're not able to play a two-way game, you're just not going to play in the NHL. It's a simple fact. So he really made a commitment to focus on that over the past year. I'm interested in seeing what he looks like as a senior. There's been some talk around Merrimack that they may even move him to the center position this year, which he played there as a prep player when he was at Gunnery. Before he was drafted, before he committed to Merrimack, he played center. I think at Gunnery for most of his time there, but he's played the center position in the past. Merrimack loses a center this year. There's been some rumblings that they may try him there. I don't know if he's going to stick there or if they'll ultimately move him back to the wing to try to open up some of what he can do offensively. But what it says to me is that they are impressed enough with what he's done to develop his two-way game and are comfortable enough with him and where he's at with his game to even consider moving him to center. Because I don't think that that would not have been a decision that would have been made 2 years ago when he really needed that area of his game to grow. So when I watch him play, and I've watched him play a lot, he's one of the best players in that league, just from a pure skill standpoint. He's deceptively big, because he's not 6'5", 220. You don't think of him as kind of a power forward, but he's big enough that he can play that way and he can muscle his way to the net. He is super competitive. Like, Scott Borg, the head coach at Merrimack, has described him to me as one of the most competitive people he's ever been around, period. And Scott's done this for a pretty long time, just in terms of, he's competitive in practice, to the point where he said, sometimes it may drive his teammates nuts a little bit. Like, that's how just crazy competitive he is. I think that says a lot about his mindset. He's a guy that, because he's coming back for his senior year, they're really looking for him to drive things. He's going to be a focal point for them this year, and they're hoping to replicate what they did a year ago, bringing as many people back as they're bringing, him being the main component of that.
Let's go a step further with that. Merrimack, how deep can this team go this year? And a two-part question to that: how important is it for the player development to get into the playoffs and make that goal of the Frozen Four and national championship?
I think it's huge. I think it's huge for the pro players. I think it's huge for all of them. Just to play meaningful games is important. To play it under those bright lights and under that pressure is important. It's interesting to me. Merrimack this year, there was only 3 teams in the country that didn't have a single player into the transfer portal. Merrimack was one of them. Lost in the Hockey East Championship game in overtime. Lost in the first round of the tournament to Quinnipiac. No shame in that. They go on and win the national title.
No shame.
So
stingy defense from them.
Big time.
Yeah.
I think that there's a sense among those Merrimack players, and a lot of those guys are 5th-year seniors that are coming back. I get the impression that there's kind of an unfinished business vibe with that group, which will be interesting to watch develop because of the teams that have those unfinished business stories tend to do pretty well in my experience. So I think that exists with them, and they've got some guys too that even undrafted players that I'm curious to see where they land, because I think they're flying under the radar a little bit. Defenseman named Zach Bookman, who set records in the Alberta League for offensive numbers, was a freshman last year. I think he's a guy that if he adds some strength, like we talked about earlier, could really pop. And then a forward who, I'll be honest with you, like I can't understand why he's not getting more looks, because you watch him play and he just does everything right. Ben Brar, who's another undrafted forward. I don't know if he's going to end up in a development camp this summer. I hope he does, because you watch him play and he doesn't have the skill of Jefferies, but he's always around the net. He's always doing little things. The biggest thing that I'll say about him, and it still sticks with me now, they had a game early in the season last year against UMass in overtime, on 3-on-3 overtime, and Brar picks up the puck in the neutral zone, blows past the defender on the outside, beats the guy, scores a goal, wins the game. And when I asked him, hey, can you just walk us through the goal, right? Walk us through the goal. Within that split second moment of, okay, it's 3-on-3, I've got the puck on my stick, I'm at the defensive blue line, he looked up, realized that they had 2 forwards on the ice. So it wasn't a D he was going to be one-on-one with, it was a forward. Knew he was probably going to have trouble transitioning to go back. He's telling me this. He's like, I saw it was a forward, figured he was going to have trouble making the transition in his feet going backwards. So I thought if I got to the outside, I'd be able to blow past him and just kind of outmuscle him to the net. And it's exactly what he did. And I said to their coach after the game, like, it's so impressive to hear that, because all that went through his head in half a second.
Yep.
So yep. Processes the game, really fast. And I think Jefferies and Brar each had 14 goals last year. Jefferies had more assists, but he's a guy just to kind of keep a name on a notepad somewhere, because he's one that I'm interested in seeing where he lands too.
Absolutely. Listen, real quick, we've talked about it real quick twice so far. Can we just explain to the younger viewers what the portal is?
Mm-hmm.
The transfer portal.
Yeah, it was instituted a couple of years ago. It's not just in hockey; it's across all college sports. NCAA players, the old rule was if you were going to transfer, you had to sit out a year. The new rule is you have a one-time transfer exemption, so you can transfer once without having to sit. You can transfer and play the very next season. The way to do that is you enter what's called the transfer portal. The process is pretty simple. All you do is go to your current school's compliance office and say, hey, I intend to transfer. And then that school office has 48 hours to enter you in the portal. Once you're in the portal, any other college team can reach out to you and try to recruit you from there. It's been pretty level the last couple of years at around 250 to 270 players that go in there over the course of an off season. There's windows when players can't enter. It's I think 60 days from the start of the NCAA tournament. So, or the announcement, of the NCAA tournament. So the window for this year is closed. No more players can enter, but there are uncommitted players in there who can commit. Some of it is players looking for a change of scenery. Some of it's a player that might be in his 5th year and says, hey, I'm going to try to put on a team that has a chance to win because I want to try to win. In other cases, there's teams who cut players and they don't have a choice but to try to find a new home. So it's kind of a mix of reasons why players go in there, but it's essentially a way for players to transfer and find the new school.
All right, listen, I'm going to give Islander fans a little bit of a tidbit here. They've been drafting overagers the last couple of years to help quickly develop their Bridgeport system. And we've seen over the years some players who are drafted a little bit more on the talent level, like a Jefferies. They usually bring in someone else from their team to kind of help with their development, just in case they're on the same team and whatnot. And I think there is a player on Merrimack, and hopefully I don't ruin his name, Matt Capone. I like this kid. I like what I saw of him. He already has that AHL build, and I was wondering if you can tell Islander fans a little bit more about Capone, because I think the Islanders can just pluck him in the 7th round with no problems whatsoever.
Yeah, he talked to some teams this winter, actually, over Christmas break. Had
Oh,
a
good.
breakout year. Yeah, he had a breakout year. There's no question about it. He was a kid, like we said earlier, comes in out of prep school hockey. Actually missed a year. So he came out of prep school, and
Ooh,
prep school had shut down the year before he came in because
okay.
of COVID. So he basically had a year off before he was an 18-year-old freshman. But another example, if Merrimack sent him to junior hockey, they knew they probably weren't going to be able to keep him. So they
Right.
brought him as an 18-year-old, knew there was going to be some growing pains there. And there was. He had 9 points as a freshman, played 25 games out of 37, whatever it was that they played. So he was in the lineup more often than he wasn't, but there were still some games where he sat. And when he was in, wasn't really in a top 6 role. All last summer, August, September, getting ready for preseason stuff, the buzz out of Merrimack was he's one of our best players. Like it's him and Jefferies.
Yes.
And I said, well, I expect him to take a jump, but I'm curious what it's going to actually look like. He took a huge jump. I mean, at times last year, he was their number 1 center as a 19-year-old. So, yes, I mean, it was his second year in college hockey. Most kids his age, it's their first as a 19-year-old. So
Right.
he comes in and has 29 points last year. Another guy who can play both ends. He's kind of where Jefferies was his sophomore year, trying to develop that two-way game.
Okay.
He's got a little bit of, I can because I'm in Boston, I use this comparison a lot. He's got a little bit of Marchand in him. Just
All right.
a
I'll take
little
that.
can be a little bit of a pest in a good way.
In a
I don't
good
think
way.
it's a bad thing.
You want him on your
I
team?
don't think it's a bad thing. Gets under the opponent's skin a lot. His mouth is moving most of the game, which can be good.
He'll fit
I
right in.
actually, because he's not big, right? He's like 5'10", I think, or 5'11". But it's funny.
5'11",
It's
yeah.
actually my son was at a game. It was at a Merrimack game this year and was sitting next to his mom. And we were talking after the game, and I was joking around with her, and I said, yeah, my kid here's got to learn to shut his mouth. He's a yapper out there. I keep telling him at some point you're going to get punched by somebody a lot bigger than you, and you're going to shut up. And she laughed, and she goes, it didn't work with Matty. He got punched in the mouth and kept running his mouth. But that's he's got a little bit of fire there, and it's good. I think it gets people going, and I definitely think it can take people off their games. And he's got the skill to back it up. Especially this year, you saw it. So he's a guy that I know some teams were on. I think he will get drafted, just because I think it's hard to ignore almost 30 points as a 19-year-old in Hockey East. And at one point, not even at one point, for large stretches of last year, was the top center playing alongside Jefferies on a team that was top 20 in the country. So he's a driver at the college level.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, guys that are his size, there's always that little bit of if you're under 6 feet, there's always that little bit of a hurdle to get over at the pro level. But I think the tenacity that he has can get him there. He scored a big goal in the Hockey East Championship game, a hockey semifinal, scored in overtime when they beat UMass Lowell on a play where he just put his nose down and went to the net. I mean, that's kind of what he does. It's not always pretty. Sometimes it's greasy, but the goals count all the same. And, he's that type of player. He's just that hard-nosed, tough player that can score.
Good. Beautiful. Listen, we have about 2 minutes left. For Islander fans watching this today, do you feel Jefferies and Berg are ready for at least the AHL? We know they're going back to college, but if they're not ready, are they still on pace for an AHL professional career? At least for now, because I don't. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, Jefferies almost signed this year. From what I understand, he had offers this year and opted to go back to Merrimack. When I talked to him about it, he kind of said, "There's a little bit of unfinished business here," So I think he had the opportunity to leave if he wanted to. I think he would have been ready for the next step this year. Berg, the same thing, just because of the way that he plays. But at the same time, because of the leagues that they're in, staying in college for another year is not going to hurt them.
No,
You know
not
what I
at all.
mean? Like, because it's not like they're going to sit there and be against lower level competition every night. If you're playing in Hockey East and you're playing in the ECAC and the NCHC, you're playing against top competition every single night. So I don't think it's going to hurt them at all. But at the end of next year, could both slide in and sign? Yeah, 100%. And I think they would do well.
Beautiful. Mike, I want to thank you so much for coming on. This was a treat for me. I'm hoping this was a real good insight for Islander fans who want to know a little bit more about the college prospects. Where can they find you on social media?
It's real easy. At Mike McMahon CHN. Just go there and all my stuff gets posted there.
Beautiful. So, love to have you on during the season. We can talk more college prospects because I know the Islanders are going to have a few more.
Sounds good to me. Thanks.
Beautiful. So, again, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming on. This was the first half hour of Isles Talk. In the next segment, we are going to have Patrick Williams of AHL.com. We're going to be going over the Bridgeport Sound Tigers. So, once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on, and we'll see you next time. Alrighty, guys. So I hope you enjoyed that part of the Isles path to the draft 2023. The college kids, the college prospects. Clearly, according to Mike, these kids could be AHL ready right now, which is very, very good to hear. But I'm also glad that they are spending another year at least, in college to go after those national championships and to further their development. So I am excited um, to see what they do in college next season. I'm going to hit a game or two over at Merrimack, maybe even go to UConn, check them out over there, especially Alex Jefferies at this point. So listen, we're going to continue here with the 2023 Isles Path to the Draft. Bridgeport edition. These are the professionals. As of right now, Patrick Williams has not come on, but again, as I said at the beginning of the show, he is covering the Calder Cup playoffs in Hershey. So this was a little bit of a hit or miss. At some point, he will come back on. I'd love to have him. Maybe we'll just have to wait another week or two, and we'll see. Maybe he pops in as I'm talking. But for now, he's busy with the Calder Cup playoffs, and you know, it happens. It's part of the business right now. But let's get into Bridgeport. A lot of people want to know if this was a successful season. And in all honesty, yes, it was. Did they make the playoffs? No. Should they have made the playoffs? Yes. But again, injuries to the Islanders, the big club, the New York Islanders. Bridgeport loses Simon Holmstrom. They lose Samuel Bolduc. You got a bunch of players being showcased throughout the season, for that potential trade for whatever it was. Injuries happen. What I like about Bridgeport so far this coming season, we talked about it in the junior section of the show 2 weeks ago. They have a lot of undrafted juniors coming in. They signed some college free agents as well. There is more talent coming in. There's going to be stronger competition. There's going to be a drive for this organization to be better, because then at this point moving forward, unless the Islanders make another splash, the Islanders have no reason right now to trade their 2024 or 25 first round picks. And anyone who gets drafted from here on out, including this season, there's a lot of competition for them to actually try to make the team, or they get sent back to juniors. So I'm going to be excited to see what Bridgeport can do this coming season. When I look at other teams in the American Hockey League, you got Hershey, Wilkes-Barre, Scranton Penguins, the Providence Bruins, the Syracuse Crunch. Lately, it's been Charlotte, Grand Rapids, Detroit system for years. Rochester is now showing it. Rochester's finally back. the Chicago Wolves. These teams all had some kind of structure and stability, and that usually tended to be, success. Do I think the Islanders have that? Yes. The structure is definitely there. The structure is coming from Lou Lamoriello. The structure is coming from Chris Lamoriello. And there's a certain way that the Islanders want their players to play. So the structure is certainly there. For the fans who want to know why Brent Thompson is still head coach, because it comes up every year, I get the question every time. Coach Thompson is doing what he's told to do. Okay, it's exactly what Mike had said before. Certain players, we don't know what role these players are going to have. Okay, so in Simon Holmstrom's case, no, the offense wasn't there, but his two-way game has improved dramatically. The only thing the kid hasn't done is score a little more. There are roles for these kids to play, and they have to get better at those roles so that way when they are ready, they're going to move up. They're going to pull a Hudson Fashion. Hudson Fashion is a perfect example. He plays the role that he was given. He did it well. And what happened? He gets himself an NHL contract. That's exactly what Bridgeport is trying to do. Where is Bridgeport, though? Bridgeport's on the cusp. They're on the cusp of making the playoffs every single year. They're trying to turn themselves into the Hershey Bears, into the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, depending on where you live. And then the Providence Bruins. Okay, and then once you get into the playoffs, in all honesty, folks, the American Hockey League playoffs, if you're not watching them, you should. You really should. It's another level. In the American Hockey League, anything can happen. Anything can happen. It's the same as the NHL. But the question is, does Bridgeport have the players and the character to get themselves past round one? I think the Islanders right now have players that can get them into the playoffs. Who do they have on this roster that are built for the playoffs? That's something I need to see. As someone who follows the prospects and drafting and everything else like that, I need to see those players step up. And I think starting this season, Bridgeport's going to be there. The New York Islanders not getting injured will benefit greatly. Absolutely. So I did talk a little bit about Simon Holmstrom. For right now, Simon, for me, I don't think he's ready for full-time NHL, but give him a half a season down in Bridgeport or longer. I think the next time he gets called up, I don't think he goes back. I think he's going to have a Devon Toews moment. That's who I think. And Matt brought up Ruslan Isakov. Same way. Isakov, no matter where you put him in whatever league, he's done very well. He has. But I need to see, and this is my biggest, it's not an issue right now because the Islanders had nine rookies throughout the season, including Ishikov. But starting next season, I think Ishikov has had enough experience before Bridgeport to the point where I would really want to see Ruslan Ishikov take over the league. He doesn't have to be number one, but maybe top 10 in scoring. That would be something I want to see. Chris Terry, Andrew Hoff, those guys scoring, getting in the top 20, top 10, wherever they were, that's good on one side, but they're aging veterans. They're good veterans, but those are not the Bridgeport Islanders you want to see. You want to see Ruslan Ishikov. Go for it. You want to see William DeFore, score more goals. DeFore had a decent season, 20 goals, in his first season, but he was a minus 13. Okay, it doesn't, I know a lot of people don't look at the plus minuses anymore, but when you actually see, um, you know, a minus 13, that's a little troubling. And having said that, I am going to welcome our next guest. Here he is, Patrick Williams of the AHL.com. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for doing this. Appreciate it.
No, not a problem. So listen, we were talking about Bridgeport in general. And when I watch the American Hockey League and I'm watching the teams that are always in there, you get your Syracuse Crunch, you get your Charlotte Checkers, the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, your Hershey Bears, who are in the Calder Cup Finals. Those are teams that have had success for so long now. Where do you see Bridgeport in the bigger scope of things in the AHL?
I mean, generally speaking, Bridgeport's been one of those clubs that's been able to develop a fair number of prospects, all things considered. I mean, it does tend to be one of those situations where what you put into it is what you get out of it. So if you're putting tons of high-level draft picks, for example, right, like it should follow that you get NHL players out of it more often than not, right? But we're like a team like Syracuse, for example, and Tampa Bay, where they really make a lot of headway, is the fact that they can get a third or fourth round pick, get into the NHL, either with themselves or with somewhere else, like a Carter Hagee, for example, Yanni Gord, Matthew Joseph. I mean, even players that don't stay with them, inevitably they're able to be used for either a year or two in Tampa before they move on, or they're maybe they're used as trade capital, whatever the case may be.
Right.
They do that. They hit a lot on those types of players. It's not that they're necessarily developing, first and second round picks every year, but they're really sort of finding those value players and those guys that maybe kind of fall between the cracks a little bit, and getting those guys, and they're very patient. That's the other thing. You look at a Syracuse, for example, Grand Rapids and Detroit for a long time, starting to get back to that now too under Steve Yzerman. Very patient. Like they'll overcook a prospect in order to not run the risk of putting that prospect into a situation where they're going up and down for a couple of years. Like when they decide to bring a player up, they want to keep them there, and they don't want to put them on that elevator back and forth. So I think those are the elements that maybe Bridgeport hasn't always had in the past. And then just winning, right? Like, Bridgeport, when they came in 2001, they went to the final the first year. And, really, if you look at their history ever since then, I believe they've won one playoff round in the last 20 years. So that's a ton of experience that your players aren't getting. You look at what, like, for example, like the Hershey Bears are getting this year. Those guys have gone through now 4 rounds of playoffs. They faced face down, like having to close out a team. Other teams like a Coachella Valley, for example, the new Seattle affiliate, they've already played 4 elimination games. Right, even including in the first 3 games, there was a play-in round. So, like, they got that pressure early on. Those guys have had to learn how to play those must-win games that we always hear about. But Bridgeport players haven't, by and large, gotten that. I mean, they make the playoffs here and there, and maybe they stay in for a round or so, like last year, but they don't get that, that 2-month run that, let's say a Hershey's getting, or Coachella. I mean, Coachella's been playing since April 19th. They played 5 teams, all playoff teams. They played the number 1 team in the league during the regular season, had to eliminate that team. Now they're playing a team that was second overall in the Eastern Conference here in the Cup final. Like, that's just high-level competition you're playing. You're not kind of just beating up on maybe, another weak team, right? Like, so that I think is, you start to look at some of those different areas. That's where the differences start to trickle out.
I get this question asked to me every year. Um, a lot of Islander fans, Bridgeport and New York, they're wondering why Brent Thompson is still the head coach of the Islanders. And I had said this right before you came on. For me, when I define success, at least watching AHL games, it's structure, it's stability to get you
Mhm.
that success. The structure is there from Lou Lamoriello down. I
Yes.
don't think that's ever been in debate. But Thompson brings that stability
Yeah.
for his tenure in Bridgeport. I mean, the guy has like a 538 winning percentage.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the coach or the players at this point? You're playing in the AHL. You're playing in a professional league. If you want to get to the NHL, is it more on the players to get themselves there, or is it really? And this could be said for any team, not just Bridgeport. Is it really on the players or more the coaching?
Ultimately, it comes down to the player. I mean, you can put any coach. I mean, I think of the top developmental coaches like a Ben Gru in Syracuse or Seth Appert in Rochester, Spencer Carberry when he was in Hershey. I mean, guys that really succeeded at that part of the game. You're only as good as the players will let you be as a coach, right? And if the player's not invested, at least to the same extent that you are as a coach, it's just not going to work. I mean, and we've seen that, I mean, list a mile long, right? Of
Yeah.
players that, came in as first, second round picks, all the potential in the world. And then they get to the pro game and it's like, whoa, this is a totally different business here. All the things that you could get away with doing in junior or college or wherever you're coming from, you can no longer do because you're playing one level below the NHL. You're playing every night in this league. You're playing players that have played NHL games. In some cases, have played a lot of NHL games and are maybe just quarter step too slow, or just 10 pounds too light or something. Something's keeping them out of the NHL. But like in a lot of ways, like if there's maybe 5 things you need to be playing the NHL, a lot of players in the AHL 4.5, right? So like you're really close. I was just talking to Dan Bilesma the other day. So obviously somebody that's won a Stanley Cup, Jack Adams, coach of the Olympics, and he said it's a real thin line. A lot of cases. I mean, that's why scouting is so difficult, right? Like, what is the difference between an NHL player and an AHL player? It's not obvious in most cases. Like, it's very subtle, very small, and you're really starting to pick through some really minuscule details in a lot of cases. So, in case of Bridgeport, like you said, Thompson's structured. He's certainly willing to put the work in with his players. I can tell you this: he's respected around the league by other coaches.
I haven't heard a bad thing from other players either.
Yeah, no, and to me, and that's. And I speak to a lot of coaches off the record. Never heard anything but good words about Brent Thompson. And I can't say that for every other coach, right? Like sometimes there are coaches that don't get that respect. Brent Thompson's not one of them. Like everyone recognizes the work that he does and the effort that he puts into it, and just this is a league where it's tough to win. Just A, there's 32 teams, number one, and B, if your NHL club is pulling up a lot of talent, back and forth, even just not even the number of players, but just the frequency, maintaining that any semblance of consistency, stability in your lineup. Like if you're playing a 3-3 weekend and you're using 3 different sets of lines that weekend, like you're going to be up against it, right? So like those are just some of the elements that make it difficult. So I've heard some of that criticism coming out of the Islanders world. I have to say I don't understand it myself. It's just speaking as
because I don't either.
yeah, just kind of speaking as a detached third party with no rooting interest, vested interest here. I don't understand it. So it doesn't really follow a lot of logic in my eyes.
Beautiful. So let's get into Bridgeport a little deeper here. Ruslan Ishakov.
Mm-hmm.
Speedy, dynamic, almost reminds me when I watch him play, he's like a Matt Barzell on the wing.
Yep.
But for me, the playbook is almost out on him. It's like the defensemen know he's trying to take you out 1-on-2, 1-on-3, and he just gets bumped off the puck with no help behind him.
Yeah.
Give me your thoughts on Ruslan Ishakov.
He's going to have to get stronger. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, that's the thing. Like, you can be a small player, right? But you got to be a strong player. Like, you know, and you look at obviously the extreme case would be a Marty St. Louis. Yeah, like he was small, but like the guy was jacked.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, other players have had success, like, you know, like Marchessault, for example. Like, just we saw him last night with Vegas.
Let's do it.
A guy that's, you know, he came through the AHL path. He came in undrafted, signed an AHL contract with the Rangers, went through Columbus system, went through Tampa's system. It took him a good 4 to 5 years to finally make it and stick in the NHL. You know, sure, he's small, like height wise, but like he's built, like he can handle that rough going. He can push opponents off the puck. He can use his strength, but also has that ability to also just, you know, play physically. And it doesn't mean putting somebody through the wall. It just means, you know, out muscling an opponent for the puck, winning those battles, right? So for Ishakov, I just think it's going to take time at you know, that's probably the best case scenario. And I think he showed enough promise this year that you can be encouraged. But, you know, like one of the big themes I've heard from coaches the last few years is there's just this increasing recognition that you can't put players on these hard, fast timelines. Well, you know, if a guy's not up in 2 years, write him off, or 3 years. Like, it's now there's a sense that, hey, some guys need 4 or 5 years, but if you're willing to put in that time and that development, you can get a payoff at the end. Like I said with Marchessault, like he was certainly not an overnight success. Like,
Nope.
You know, people think of him as that because like they're kind of like, hey, where did this guy come from? But like really, he wasn't. Like he put in years in the AHL just to become a better AHL player, never mind an NHL player. And when he went to the NHL, he certainly did not take that lead by storm. I mean, here's a guy, he went through Tampa. They let him go. He went to Florida as a free agent, and then they exposed him in the expansion draft, right? So it's an inexact science, but like I think with Ishakov, like there's enough there that, you know, you have something to work with, and only 22 years old. And so we'll kind of see where it goes. I like the fact that he's already played some high level European pro before coming over here. So I think that's encouraging. But again, he's a player I would have loved to have seen get some real playoff experience rather than it's the end of the year, you go home, right? Like that to me is just a missed opportunity for the Islanders really as a whole. That you're not getting a player into those 10, 15, in some cases 20 games of high level. I mean, Calder Cup playoff hockey is the closest thing you're getting to the NHL. And
thank you.
If you can't get into that in the first place, and the AHL certainly makes it generous enough. I mean, 23 of 32 teams make the playoffs, so you certainly have a chance to make it. I mean,
yeah.
So, you know, the fact that Bridgeport missed that cut really had to kind of stumbled down the stretch. I think, you know, for Ishakov, really any young player in that system, they're missing out now, not going through this.
Well, before we get into any other players, I brought this up to the other Islander fans that were watching the show about a successful season. Some of these kids were brought up to play with the big leagues, and the big league ended up making the playoffs, and it was a sacrifice with Simon Holmstrom playing 50 games. Samuel Bolduc was there. You had a bunch of kids being showcased throughout the season. Even Atu Ratu was there with the Islanders. Is it a successful season for the organization, knowing that, yes, Bridgeport did help them big club, or is it more of a miss because they didn't make the playoffs?
That really is, I think it comes down to the individual team, individual perspective, philosophy, kind of however you want to break it down. Where's the team at kind of in their cycle? I think overall, if you sort of lean toward, well, what was best for the NHL club, then I guess I would say it was successful because, like you said, those players did help the Islanders get into the playoffs. Now, granted, I don't know. Like it really does come down to kind of a philosophical thing. I think, you know, it does make it difficult in that sense. when you think of like, well, like they didn't, you know what I mean? Like they did and they didn't, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it was good and it wasn't. And I guess I find like you're waiting for more, right? Like you're
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah.
They made the playoffs, but it wasn't great,
Yeah, they could have been better.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So another player the Islander fans wanted me to ask you about, William Dufour. Had a really good, decent first season. I know a lot of fans don't look at the plus minus stat, but minus 13 throughout the season. Obviously foot speed is still a big thing with him. Give me your thoughts on William Dufour's first season in the AHL.
It's about what I expected, and for me, I guess he comes down to, all right, yeah, like you come in with some hope and, he had obviously put up big junior numbers and people kind of get
it's a trap,
pumped up over those gaudy numbers. And I'm like,
yeah,
well, they're great, but you're playing 16, 17-year-olds. Now you're playing against 25-year-olds.
Yeah.
On the other hand, he's a 5th round pick. So I think, that was a positive there that, you came in with some extra hype, and obviously the size is excellent. Fantastic shot. I think that's the first thing everyone notices, everyone talks about with him. And just at times, though, he certainly looked the part of a guy trying to find his way through the pro game for the first time. And some nights it looks good and other nights it's not, right? Like players are everyone sort of thinks of development as being like a straight line up, right? It's more of a and that's sometimes even on the weekends, right? Like, Friday night, a guy looks great. Saturday is like, Sunday, maybe the first period, he looks awful. And then by the third period, he looks okay. And then just finding that consistency is the biggest challenge for a lot of players, right? Like, being able not necessarily be the best player on the ice every night, but just giving a coaching staff something that they can rely on one night, to the next. And I think those players that can do it are the ones that do find themselves up in the NHL sooner rather than later. So I think for him, the challenge is just find that consistency. Use what works for you, obviously, which is like the size and the shot. Use that as the focal point of your game, and then try to to the best extent possible, round out kind of the weaker spots of your game. So if maybe they're not an asset, they're at least not a liability, right? So, in some ways you are what you are as a player. Like he's never going to be fleet of foot, but he can be better, mobility wise, to make it at least more of a kind of a non-factor one way or the other. So I think for him, he's probably a little bit more of a long-term project. Kind of, in the sense of I think you probably got to give him at least another 2 years down in Bridgeport and then see what you got. Right. And then that's okay. Right. Like a lot of players need 3 years. That's, certainly reasonable. Even if that's the case, you'd still have them up there by 23, 24 years old. So I think, hey, if you could get a 5th round pick and make him into an NHL player, you would take that every time.
Absolutely.
21 goal season as a rookie. That's good. That's something to work with. Now you just have to round out those other parts of his game.
Switching to defense real quick, Samuel Bolduc has been getting his game completed. I want to say he's looking more like a complete defenseman now. Give me your thoughts on Bolduc. How close is he to the NHL, do you think?
I think pretty close. I was impressed by him a lot. I thought there were nights where maybe he was the best player at the ice for Bridgeport. Obviously, the size is great. I think for him, as with so many defensemen, like the key is to just try to play within your bounds, right?
Right.
Don't try to do too much. And I think that's where a ton of players get into trouble. First at the AHL level, and then certainly at the NHL level. Those guys up top will pick you apart every night, all night. And you can get away with a little bit more down the AHL, but not a whole lot. I think that's learning when to push the play and when to not push the play. Even more importantly, I think that's the challenge for a lot of defensemen, especially guys like him. But I think, really you have to, hit a career year.
Yeah.
And really sort of showed that like he can put the puck on net. Like that's another huge thing for young defensemen in this league. So I've been impressed. Like I think there's something there. Second round pick, so I think he plays a pretty smart game. So I would say I'd expect him to certainly be in the mix. Like he got almost 20 games in the NHL this year.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be certainly expecting to be in the mix for that, if not more, and then maybe mid-season next year, depending on injuries or whatever the case may be, maybe he finds a way to kind of break in full time.
Yep.
And become a full-time New York Islander.
The other opposite side of that spectrum now, Robin Salo was like a practical no-show for me this entire season. He just wasn't noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
I was expecting a little more out of him. I was honestly hoping he'd be top 6, or at least fairly close to it, for the Islanders, and it just hasn't happened yet. And yes, we know the level of development changes with every player, but I was expecting more out of Robin Salo this past season. Give me your thoughts on Robin Salo.
Yeah, that's a player where, that's where I think I don't like when players get on that up and down elevator, right? Like,
okay,
one night they're in Bridgeport, one night they're in New York, and they're playing different roles, and they're certainly the scrutiny and the pressure is different, and I like a guy to almost keep him stay put. Like I said, the best teams, they overcook their players down to the minors. You look at you look at Washington with Connor McMichael. Just to use Hershey as an example. They sent him down November. I mean, there's a first-round pick himself, a guy that played all of last year in the NHL, and they kept him in the AHL the rest of the year from November on. He ultimately ended up, he became an alternate captain for a bit. He's become a top 6 player. Like I think once you start putting those players up and down constantly, it's just disruptive. It's even off the ice, right? Like one night you're in New York, you're in Bridgeport the next night, kind of like you're living out of a hotel sometimes. Like it's just disruptive. Like I just want to see a player like him, like stay in Bridgeport for the year, like be dominant, right? Then
dominate the league.
Dominate the league. As many coaches have told me, if you can't dominate the AHL, you can't play in the AHL. You can't handle the AHL. How are you going to do it in the NHL, right?
Right.
And that for me is what I like to see with him. Like certainly there's a lot to like there, right? Like this is a guy that had legit high level European experience and fit the Swedish league before he even came over. So like there was already a lot to work with. For me though, I kind of want to I want to see him just be one place for one time
and just do it.
What he is, right? Like and figure out what he is, and then try to then convert that to the NHL.
Okay. Moving on to the future now. They're bringing in players like Aiden Fulp. They signed to at a college free agent. They're bringing in Matthew Maggio, the Ontario Hockey League scoring leader. They're bringing in more competition this year. If the New York Islanders remain healthy and they stick with our philosophy of keep the kids down there until it's absolutely necessary to bring them up, do you see Bridgeport back in the playoff hunt or even in the playoffs next year?
They should be. I mean, I think a lot comes down to, your veterans, right?
Sure.
And I think for the most part, they got, certainly with, Chris Terry, consummate professional.
Yep.
Andrioff. I think they certainly got what you would like from your veteran production-wise. Good leadership. You have Helgerson, who's been a good leader there for a long time. So, for me, I think kind of where they got off track sometimes is just they could really use a dominant number one veteran defenseman, right? And they're out there. I mean, they're not that hard to find at the AHL level. It's just a matter of making that commitment to bring them in, and being comfortable with the idea that those guys are going to play, a lot of minutes. Now, if you manage it right, those guys can play a lot of minutes and really bring along some of your younger prospects. But you don't like if you look at the top teams in the league in terms of winning, making the playoffs, even you generally don't do it without good vets. Like the vets are the ones, especially the first half of the year before the younger, kids and the prospects start to really figure things out. Those vets are the ones that, win you games, stock up points first half of the year, kind of while everybody else figures things out.
And they teach the kids how to win. They teach them how to be professionals.
And people forget that a lot. People roll their eyes about that. But you think I think sometimes it's easy to forget how young some of these players are. They're 20, 21 years old in some cases. Like if they weren't playing pro hockey, they'd either, just be starting out in the work world, or they'd be in school, or they'd be doing something like that. Like it's a lot for these players, like just in terms of like dealing with that professional pressure. There's the off ice adjustment, just learning to live on your own, all the things that come with early, adulthood, right? You need sometimes you need a player that tells, a player like, hey, this is how you pay your bills, or this is how you, learn to cook, maybe 4 or 5 2 meals, like things like that, like little details nobody really even thinks about.
Right.
I've heard time and time again, like those are sometimes the things that trip up young prospects, right? Like it's not always the stuff on the ice. Maybe it's a guy that's homesick. Maybe a guy, misses his girlfriend back home, whatever the case may be, right? Like a lot of just like normal life things that having kind of that big brother figure, a guy 25, 30 years old, maybe that 30-year-old player, veteran is married, invites young player or two over just to have dinner that night, right? Things like that, just like make a guy kind of get him out of his house, like get him away from the video games for a couple hours, like things like that, like little details. Show, like you said, show them how to be a pro. Like I think of Zach Dalpe down in Charlotte. He just finished up in Florida on their Stanley Cup playoff run. Consummate professional, like exactly the guy you'd want leading your young players, right?
Right.
Just shows them how to be a pro on and off the ice, always in a good mood, always kind of the hardest working guy in practice, hardest working guy in the gym. It really shows the standard, because you see with a lot of young players, like they think they're working hard. It's not that they're slacking off, but they don't know what the standard is, right? And that's where, sort of a veteran or a group of veterans that can show them, okay, the bar is not here. The bar is actually up here. Yeah. Like you think you're working hard, and I believe that you believe that, but it's actually, you have to be better than that, right? And so that's the thing. Like in anything, you need somebody to kind of show you the way. Like especially when you're just starting out in life, whether you're going to work, as a professional hockey player, or in the everyday world, like you need somebody that shows you the way, and that's what the veterans really do. Even beyond what they bring on the ice.
Should hockey fans be watching the American Hockey League more often, and should they be watching the playoffs?
Absolutely. Watching the playoffs, for one, is you're seeing kind of what are the best practices, what are the best things that successful teams are doing, right? Number one. Number two is anywhere from 88 to 90, 91% of your players in the NHL come through the American Hockey League. Look at your coaches. Look at Vegas. 24 out of 25 players on that team that just won the Stanley Cup came through. I mean, every single one of those guys, pretty much. I remember Aiden Hill being a guy.
Yes.
Certainly not a guy that was a dominant player at the AHL level, but like slowly worked his way up. Like Marchessault, obviously another example of that. I mean, you go right down the list.
Yeah.
For every Jack that there is, there's far more of those guys that have to learn the pro game at the AHL level first.
And that goes back to Seattle, because their expansion draft was different from Vegas, but they were drafting players that had a lot of Calder Cup experience, and they just took that and they ran with it this year. They already had that knowledge, that experience to take on whoever they wanted to play in the playoffs, and you need that. And the Islanders have been lacking that for decades now. We can honestly say decades, and that has to change.
You need that winning experience. Whatever level you talk about, teams want winners, right? That's why you sign guys out, whether it's junior or college or the AHL, wherever you're looking at. Like you have to have been through that. Guys that go home and the middle of April. What do they know about winning?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So, Patrick, I wanted to thank you for coming on. This has been great. Where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter pretty much all the time. It seems like that's at P Williams AHL, all one word. I'm on the AHL.com every day. Like I have content every day, pretty much. Same thing with NHL.com. We do a lot there. So I put all that stuff up on Twitter, and you'll be able to find me there.
Beautiful. Are you enjoying the Calder Cup Finals?
Yeah, Coachella Valley, very nice. I mean, it's amazing what
Yeah.
they've done there. A market with no real pro hockey experience before, and they're selling out that building 10,000 strong every night. Same thing in
That's
Hershey,
amazing.
kind of the opposite. The oldest franchise in the league, tons of history. The only team other than the original six, they're the oldest team in North America in terms of hockey. So you just got two real good teams going at it, and kind of be a close series one way or the other. But yeah, no, it's Calder Cup playoff hockey. The finals, whatever league you're talking about, are always a great experience.
Yep. I love watching the playoffs. I love going to AHL games. It's definitely worth the money to go every time.
For sure.
So, Patrick, I want to thank you again for coming on. Hopefully, we can have you on during the season next year, and we'll talk more Bridgeport.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Patrick.
Take care. Bye.
Yep. And ladies and gentlemen, you did get Patrick Williams of the AHL.com and NHL.com. Robin, I'm going to take your question real quick here. I'm curious what the goaltending will look like in Bridgeport. I am going to go right now, Jakob Skarek and probably Tristan Lennox. I'm not sure if Tikkanen is going to get any time. He might if there's an injury to one of the other goaltenders. But for now, I think Jakob Skarek is going to be the goaltender, which is good. He kind of needs the games. He's only got 103 games as a goaltender, and the knock on him after he was before he was drafted was that consistency was an issue. So I think with the team itself not improving on the defensive level and him not getting enough time during the COVID seasons, I think that kind of slowed his development a little bit. I think if he can rack up another 35 games this season, maybe even go 40, if he can get as many games in as possible, I'd like to see an improvement in Jakob Skarek. Right now, he is the number 3 goaltender. At this point, I was kind of hoping he'd be the number 2, but again, COVID kind of derailed that, and the team itself is slowly getting better. So you heard it from Patrick here. Bridgeport should make the playoffs with or without injuries from the big club. I'm going to go that far. This has been a lot of fun. Any other questions as we get into water cooler talk real quick? From you guys? But yeah, that was it. Listen, thank you everyone for coming in. I hope you guys are excited with Alex Jefferies and Cameron Berg. I am. And I want to thank Patrick again for coming onto the show to talk about Bridgeport. Listen, next week, as of right now, I do have SiriusXM's Shane Malloy from hockeyprospectradio.com. He is going to be my guest next week. We are talking draft. We will talk some Islanders. We're going to talk more about development. We're going to talk about the Islanders themselves, how well they do in the drafts, going back to 2018. I'm sorry, back to 2008. We'll do a little 2018, but we're going to talk to Shane. We're going to pick his brain about the prospects, the development. We'll get a little bit more into the Islanders as well. So again, I hope you guys can join me next Wednesday. It's Shane Malloy on Isles Talk. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on. Let's go Islanders, and we will see you next week.